This is Michael Popok with a Legal AF hot take and update on Rudy Giuliani. I got a split screen moment here. His creditors have banded together. His unsecured creditors in the bankruptcy court in New York have banded together to try to compel Rudy Giuliani to sell immediately his $3.5 million condominium in Florida and to maintain insurance over all of his properties, citing to the fact he has very little assets and he hasn't yet submitted any plan to make his creditors whole. Putting aside for a minute, he's listed as part of his assets a receivable by Donald Trump for $2 million. Giuliani himself was hanging out at Mar-a-Lago in the last week. Apparently, Mar-a-Lago is now the scene of non-stop fundraisers, both for Donald Trump, people around Donald Trump, and Republican MAGA candidates who are running for office. That's all Mar-a-Lago is doing right now. Non-stop ballroom fundraisers. And Rudy Giuliani, even though he thinks that Donald Trump stiffed him for $2 million, had no problem hanging out at Mar-a-Lago and telling apparently anybody who would listen that he's living in a living nightmare, that he can't believe the nightmare that he's in, that he wakes up every day believing that it's not true. I got news for you, Rudy. It's true. You're facing criminal charges and you're going to trial in Georgia for criminal interference. You lost your bar license and your creditors have banded together because it's probably a phony bankruptcy filing by you to try to force you to sell the only assets that you have. And then he has the gall, or there's another word that sounds like gall, but starts with a B. He has the brass ones to use his Rudy Giuliani Freedom Fund to try to raise and grift money. You know what I want? I want a freedom from Rudy Giuliani Fund. I want to stop hearing about Rudy Giuliani and his $148 million judgment for defamation of his own making that was obtained fair and square by Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, those Georgia election workers. That's what started the financial tailspin for Rudy Giuliani, right? In addition to all of the attorney's fees that he hasn't paid and hasn't been paid by being a lawyer, he owes attorney's fees to his lawyers in the Ruby Freeman Shay Moss trial that I just talked about, in the Georgia election interference case. So he's got a grift on the back of this. So when he's got a few cocktails in him at Mar-a-Lago, watching these round-the-clock marathon Mar-a-Lago fundraisers, right? And telling anybody who'll listen, and even those who don't want to listen, that he's down on his luck and that he's living in a nightmare of his own making, he then goes and sends urgent fundraising emails warning about Joe Biden. Here's what he said in his fundraising email, courtesy of the Rudy Giuliani Freedom Fund. Here we go. I didn't give up when my home was raided. I'll talk about that in a minute. Remind you, 2 years ago, April, federal agents raided his house and took over 30 or 40 electronic devices off of him, off of a search warrant, because they were trying to figure out whether he should be prosecuted for improperly and illegally lobbying on behalf of Ukraine at the time when he wasn't licensed to do so or registered to do so. So I didn't give up when my home was raided or when I was wrongfully arrested and had my mugshot taken in Fulton County. That's for the election interference at the heart of Fani Willis, Fulton County DA's case that's going to trial probably as early as July. And there's no way I'm backing down now. He went on to say in his filing that friend, this is how he starts his fundraising grift. There's no other way to say this. You may truly be my only hope. I almost waited for him to say Obi-Wan Kenobi at the end of that. The Biden regime is sending a top ally of President Trump to prison, all caps. That's him. and that's true. That's the only honest thing that I've heard Rudy Giuliani say in the last 10 years, that the Biden administration, Department of Justice, is going to send him to jail. Actually, I think Fani Willis, the Fulton County DA, who's a state prosecutor, is going to send him to jail. He goes on, though, as only Rudy Giuliani can. The deep state is hell-bent on indicting, arresting, bankrupting, and imprisoning President Trump and his top allies for daring to challenge the corrupt forces that have hijacked our once free republic. Back to more Star Wars imagery. And as the lawyer who successfully defended President Trump from impeachment, I am at the top of their list. I don't know. This is such a mishmash of word salad, of dementia. I don't even know where to start, but I will. That's why I love my hot takes like this one. Hopefully you enjoy them half as much as I do in presenting them. Rudy Giuliani was not the lead trial lawyer for Donald Trump in his impeachments. He wasn't. He wasn't the lead lawyer for Donald Trump in either of his two impeachments. He was impeached both times. He wasn't convicted by the Senate because the Senate was in control of Mitch McConnell and the MAGA senators. And as it related to the Jan 6th insurrection, there just wasn't enough time to have a Senate convict him. So Rudy shouldn't take any credit for that. That's not covering yourself in glory that your client got impeached, the only president in the history of our republic to be impeached twice. And he wasn't even the lead trial lawyer for either of those impeachments. I don't know what he's talking about. That's one. Secondly, he leaves out that he was the lead trial lawyer for what Pat Cipollone and Eric Hirschman, who were White House counsel at the time for Donald Trump, called Team Crazy, which was Team Giuliani, which along with Sidney Powell commenced and supervised over 70 lawsuits, all that failed by Donald Trump state and federally to try to overturn the 2020 election. And he got sanctioned and lost his law license and got his law license suspended in both New York and the District of Columbia as a result. Having nothing to do with the Biden administration, those had to do with the bars of D.C. and the bar of New York, in this case, the First Department Appellate Division, taking away his law license because he brought meritless cases in bad faith to try to overturn the will of the people and destroy democracy. Doesn't mention that. I guess that didn't fit in his email related to his fundraising. And the creditors, the unsecured creditors, I'll talk about that in a minute, are having none of it. They banded together and formed a creditors committee, which is what you do in bankruptcy court. And I'll just a quick little teach out about bankruptcy. We'll do more on the Legal AF Patreon. But there's two types of main types of bankruptcy protection that you can file for, Chapter 11 or Chapter 7. Chapter 7 is a dissolution, meaning this company's never coming back from the dead. We're just going to marshal all the assets. But Chapter 7 is not the type of bankruptcy that Rudy Giuliani's filed for. He's filed for Chapter 11 under the Bankruptcy Code, which means that there's hope, at least, that he'll be able to get out from under his bankruptcy, emerge from bankruptcy, and restart his various companies, consultancies, his podcast, and the like. On his list of liabilities, he's got a $148 million judgment against him by Ruby Freeman and Shane Moss. Lawyers that owe him money, lawyers that he owes money to, he's got probably $160, $170 million worth of liabilities, right? On assets, he's got very few. He's got less than $50,000 worth of assets and bank accounts. He's got a $3.5 million condo. He's got a few $1 million apartment in New York. And all of that pales in comparison to the size of the liabilities, which makes him a candidate for bankruptcy. But he's got to come out of bankruptcy. And the unsecured creditors, those are the ones that don't have a judgment against him or don't have what's called a UCC, a Uniform Commercial Code security agreement filed against him, against his property. They're unsecured creditors, meaning they lent him money, he owes money to them, but other than the contract or the promise or the promissory note, they're unsecured. They have no security interest that they can wave around. Because the way bankruptcy works, there's a priority of who gets to the front of the line when the dollars are short. If there's $1, the first group that gets to the front of the line is usually the government. The Internal Revenue Service goes first. And if there's any money left over, then the secured creditors, which are led by the judgment creditors, those that get actual judgments in court like Ruby Freeman and Shane Moss, they are at the top of the list, at the top of the secured creditors list. Then it's those that have lent money and have gotten a security interest in return under the Uniform Commercial Code. UCC creditors go next, and so on and so on. And then the last at the bottom, after you get through all the secured creditors and all the liens and all the first mortgage people that lent him money to buy the property and that kind of thing, then you're down to unsecured creditors, right? Vendors that he hasn't paid, lawyers that he hasn't paid, and the like. And that group has bound together and said, sell the apartment. Now, they're not going to go first, by the way. If let's say that $3.5 million gets sold and that other amount of money gets sold for the house in New York, he's only got about $5 million. He won't ultimately, I don't believe, be able to discharge in bankruptcy the Ruby Freeman and Shane Moss intentional tort of defamation judgment. There are just certain types of judgments, certain types of liabilities that are not allowed to be discharged in bankruptcy because it's against public policy and the bankruptcy code. And one of them is something that arises out of an intentional tort, an intentional injury or conduct, in this case, the defamation against Ruby Freeman and Shane Moss. So put that aside for a minute. He's not going to be able to get rid of that judgment. He'll sell the rest of his assets, and the first one is going to come after any IRS liens, which I'm sure there are against Rudy Giuliani, is Ruby Freeman and Shane Moss on their judgment. There's not going to be much left for the unsecured creditors. I mean, it'll all be under the auspices of the bankruptcy judge, which is a very good bankruptcy judge in New York, in the Southern District of New York, in Manhattan, named Judge Lane. But this is the world that Rudy Giuliani made for himself. This is the bed he made for himself. He didn't have to represent Donald Trump. He didn't have to triple down on Donald Trump. He didn't have to sacrifice his law license. He didn't have to commit alleged crimes. He didn't have to try to overthrow democracy. He didn't have to go out of his way to defame two election workers, mother and daughter team of Shane Moss and Ruby Freeman. He didn't have to cause them injury and damage during the trial itself, while he continued to defame them outside the courtroom, which was then brought back to the jury. These are all his decisions. You know, for him to sit in Mar-a-Lago during the marathon of fundraising going on there, including for Donald Trump, is the height of hypocrisy. For him to start crying on other people's shoulders about, how did I get here? Woe is me. Woe is you. Again, as I started the hot take, I'll end it. I want a Freedom from Rudy Giuliani Fund created. I want to stop talking about this guy. He lost his bar license. He's losing he's losing his house. He's going to jail either in Georgia and or in the federal case. And that's it. And that's it. And that's the end. And that's how his obituary will be written. And that is the end of the sad case of Rudy Giuliani and the fall from grace that we have observed since 9/11 till today. Right? Yes, it's Shakespearean and it's tragedy. Yes, I get it. But I don't care anymore. Because I don't give any quarter, and I give cold comfort to anybody that tries to overthrow our democracy. And if they leave their careers and their finances in shambles in that wake, then so be it. And that is justice. And that's what we do here on the MeidasTouch Network. We follow at the intersection of law, politics, and justice all kind of cases. Civil rights, constitutional rights, a woman's right to choose, immigration rights in policy, the battle between the United States Supreme Court and out-of-control lower federal courts, state prosecutions, federal prosecutions, lawsuits, civil lawsuits that matter at that intersection of law, politics, and justice. We pull it all together on a podcast we call Legal AF. Yep, it's cheeky, but that's exactly what we mean. It's every Wednesday and Saturday on the MeidasTouch Network at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on this YouTube channel. Help them get to 3 million, MeidasTouch, 3 million free subscribers. Yeah, clear out your ears, rub your eyes. I said free. All you got to do is free subscribe and help them build this network that's really your network. No outside investors and completely grassroots in its formation and in how it's being run today. And getting the 3 million before Election Day is really important. And then you can pick up Legal AF on podcast platforms, audio. Apple, Spotify, Google, whatever you like. And then we do hot takes. The leaders of Legal AF, like me, do hot takes like this one about every hour right here on the MeidasTouch Network. So if you like what I'm doing, I'm Michael Popok. Give me a thumbs up. I'll keep the content coming to you. If you want to follow Legal AF, you can also do so through subscribing to our Patreon. Patreon.com/legalaf for exclusive content, drill downs. It's sort of like if a TED Talk and a law school had a baby. We'll do it right there on our Patreon. So until my next hot take, until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting.
Hey, Meidas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.